Attention, this is a state of national emergency. All civilians are required to be indoors by curfew. You there, get on the ground.
We're kidding. That's Matt behind the camera. We've got Tyler helping us out today. I'm Ben. That makes this stuff they don't want you to know. And none of us here in the studio are police officers or members of the military. But what's the difference between the two? You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. First, let's look at some context. Now, you have probably heard of a SWAT team. That stands for Special Weapons and Tactics. SWAT teams were not always around, but when they became a thing, they weren't even used that often until the 1980s. Until the 1980s, you would see SWAT teams rarely. They were involved in really high potential calamity situations. We're talking about hostage negotiations, bank robberies, kidnappings, the really messed up stuff. And by most accounts, these professionals would usually do a good job of, stabilizing the situation as best they could. In the 1980s, what changed is the war on drugs.
Tonight, I can report to you that we've made much progress. 37 federal agencies are working together in a vigorous national effort. And by next year, our spending for drug law enforcement will have more than tripled from its 1981 levels.
This led to an increased militarization of police and also more and more departments acquiring things like SWAT teams. A second big tilt to the evolution of police forces in the United States comes with the war on terror.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
In the wake of September 11th and the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security, more and more local police forces began acquiring military surplus. In other cases, and this is something that the opponents of militarization argue, we're seeing things that seem maybe unnecessary, maybe gratuitous for a police precinct somewhere in North Dakota to have an armored vehicle with a rotating turret in a place that has 2 murders a year on average. But even before September 11th, the U.S. Congress was working on improving access to military hardware for law enforcement agencies. As a matter of fact, in 1997, they started something called the 1033 program, which came through an agency in the Pentagon called the Law Enforcement Support Program. And what this did through grants and subsidies and just herding through paperwork was allow police precincts and other law enforcement agencies access to things that normally you would have only seen on a military base or in the theater of war. By 2005, over 17,000 police agencies had been working with this program. We're talking hundreds of aircraft, thousands of rifles, grenade launchers, stuff like that, not just the typical service pistol. Now, this isn't always a bad thing. To supporters of these programs, they would argue, in fact, that this increased militarization has reduced crime. But opponents don't agree with that at all. Like the think tank Cato Institute is probably one of the biggest, most vocal opponents of this militarization. And the reason that they are opposed to this is that they think there is a mission creep. Mission creep is a term that describes how an ordinary or the original objective of a mission slowly widens and widens and widens and widens until it becomes something else. So for instance, imagine a group that was tasked with stopping one incident of a drug raid, right? Or a drug ring. And then that expands, to other jurisdictions, other drug rings until all of a sudden, boom, it's a war on drugs. The idea of drugs or the idea of terror. So before Matt and I go into our new video this week, we wanted to set the stage for the idea of militarization. And one of the best ways to sum it up is that advocates of this increased access to military gear for the police say that it's making the country a safer place, and opponents say that it's doing the opposite. Of course, as we're going to find out, the opponents don't always agree on why this is occurring or to what end. And this is by no means something restricted to the United States. So let's end it there on the question that we hope to answer later this week. Why is this happening exactly? Why is your local law enforcement getting armor-piercing rounds and MRAPs and grenade launchers? Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned.